uh, the animals we had cows,
This is
sheep,
flat.
and we had then we had turkeys, and of course we had ducks. We lived on the creek
Filter.
side. We had the creek side, and that we had the ducks, of course, and we had ducks in the creek, and then but you see, these animals were not only for our own food, but they were a source of financial income.
Sure.
And how the turkeys the turkeys would slip off into the wooded area and hide their nest. And as a child, we had to watch those turkeys to see where they went to their nest, because they would lay their eggs in the nest, and then when they had enough eggs to set on, then they'd set on them and hatch the little turkeys, and we had to bring them to the house. And then you see in the sheep barn, we had a sheep barn, and that's where the mother sheep stood, and the little lambs would be born at night lots of times.
Sure.
And early morning, we'd have to go and carry those lambs when they were babies. If it was real cold, we'd have to bring them into our house and put them in front of our fireplace. We didn't have any central heat. We just had a fireplace and a wood stove and another wood stove to cook on, and then another wood stove. But we'd have to bring them to the heat and get the baby lambs warm enough and dry enough so they'd be born wet.
Sure.
And that was taking care of the sheep. We took care of the cows, the sheep, the turkeys, the ducks. But these also then provided food of chickens, lots of chickens. I used to, when the chickens would play on the porch, and on the porch they would, they would duty on the porch. And when I'd be having a date with Alfred, and Sunday afternoon or something he's coming, well, I'd be sure that the chickens hadn't been on the porch.
That's not the best thing to welcome a date with is duty, is it?
No, you know. And
I'm going to switch this back
let's see
to
now.
flat now.
So this is all in childhood,
Okay.
but
I'm going to stop.
then education, how do this, and let me, I need your input for a few minutes. Shall I, wanting to say what I need to tell about my grandparents.
Okay, tell me.
Okay. My father was from a large family. In fact, his mother really was a war widow. His father's mother had died at childbirth, and that's too minute. That's not interesting. My father was one of a large family. He was there. May I have time to count them?
Sure.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I think my mother was 10 children. Well, I'm sure of that. Don't move.
No, I can follow you with this.
Okay. Today is June the 19th, 2005, and my dear grandson, Mark Wilson Adams, is recording this story for and about me. I am Daisy Austin Adams. I was born almost 89 years ago. I was born August 1, 1916, and I was born on Winkler's Creek, which is in the western part of North Carolina. I was born on a farm near a small town, Boone, North Carolina. I was one of 6 children. I was the 5th in line. There are now 4 of us living. I have a sister who during this month will be 99 years old. Another sister who is 94 years old.
You mean their names?
Lula at 99 is Lula Austin Henson, and Ella is Ella Mae Bashirs. As I say, I was next in line, and now I still have a brother living who is 80 years old, and his name is Ned Austin. The 2 members of our family, which are deceased, were Collis, which was the oldest member of the family, and then the, I believe, second oldest was Louis Austin. We had a very, very family-oriented life. In other words, I considered us a very loving, close family. It seemed to be a family trait because my grandparents were from and had large families. My father's name was Samuel Monroe Austin Jr., and I think that junior's a little stretch because I think there were about 2 or 3 Samuel Monroe Austins before him, because the name is recorded in another county where that they had obtained land by doing the process of what they called entering that land, which they did whatever was necessary to get a deed to unclaimed real estate, and that was happened in Burke County. I have some record of that. In my father's family, there were 13 children. Of course, that was a mixed family because my father's first wife died and left him with I think it was either 2 or 3 small girls, and he was trying to rear them alone. And the story is told that this widow came from Caldwell County, adjoining Watauga, which is where we grew up. She came to buy some seed corn and met my grandfather. I told him that she had come to buy seed corn and that she'd heard that he might have it. Well, that was their acquaintance. Well, soon after that acquaintance, he told her that if she didn't mind, that instead of her using that seed corn, he'd like to plant it for her, and that was his type of proposal of marriage. So she accepted and brought her own child or two to join his family, which made, I think, 5 girls. Then to them were born other children, 3 of which were sons. My father was one of those sons. They lived in a cabin, and when my father started building his own home for his new wife, which he was married in the year 1903. In fact, it was March the 3rd, 1903. He was married, and he was building a home for himself and his new bride. But he was also thinking in terms of caring for his grandmother, his own mother, which was my grandmother. So he, in my former home, which is standing on Winkler's Creek now, and in which my youngest brother, Ned Austin, lives, there are wooden boards that my father took from the log cabin and put into his home for, he called it his mother's room, and they're big, nice wooden, wide boards. And so that to me was showing family attention and love and care. So as I say, he was part of a large family. Now his wife, which he met at church, but she was attending another church, which was called Cool Springs, and he was attending church. It was Poplar Grove, and her father was a minister, a Baptist preacher. They had a large family. In fact, my mother was the oldest of the 10 children. Now his name was Milton Payne, spelled Payne. At the year of my birth, he died. He was away from Boone, about 50 or more miles away from Boone, in a town holding a church revival, and he died suddenly with a heart attack. And I have been told, and this would have been in early 1916, my family has told me that they brought his body from that town where he was at to Boone in a covered wagon. And for what we call at the time before burial, we call it viewing or visiting. I have been told that they placed my grandfather Milton Payne's body on the porch of the small home that they occupied, which was called a parsonage, and they placed his body in the casket on that porch so that people from the church and from the town could pass by and view his body, which was a custom and still is in this area, still is a custom to view bodies before time of burial. Today, this very day in June of 205, I attended the First Baptist Church of Boone that he was pastor of at the time of his death. And in the hallway of the church that I was in this morning hangs his picture, along with other pictures of ministers that have served that church. And now that is my mother's father, my grandfather Payne. Unfortunately, he died a few months before my birth, because I was born later in 1916. Fortunately, I did not see him. I certainly meant to use the word unfortunately, because I was unfortunate in the fact that I did not see my Father Austin. He died before my birth. But I knew both of my grandmothers. My grandmother Payne had mothered the 10 children, but as I said prior to now, my mother was the oldest, and other members of the family had married. So she didn't have the 10 children to rear, but she was left a widow with children and very little income. Now and she lived in the town of Boone. near what was First Baptist Church and still is First Baptist Church. Of course, then she had to, after his death, provide for her own home. Now, my grandfather Austin was a landowner, and with his large family, they made a living by farming. Now, my father, being one of the three boys and being a very ambitious person, he was always interested in acquiring more land, which he did during my lifetime. And fortunately, I'm fortunate now, me and my siblings inherited mountain land from my parents. And that has been divided among the six of us. And the Adamses are fortunate to own some of that land. I'd like to tell about my family life on the farm on Winkler's Creek. As I say, I was the fifth, so the oldest one was married, and my father gave him land on which he built a home. His name was Collis. Collis has a very interesting family, which several of them survive. All of them survive now. He had two sets of twins. He had twin boys, twin girls, other girls, and other. In fact, there were 7 children in his family. My sister Lula Henson, who is now the 99-year-old, she has a very nice family, the name being Henson, and they are outstanding in their community, which is a community about 15 miles from here. I'd like to talk about my parents, how unfortunately they were uneducated. I assumed that they didn't have an opportunity to go to school much. If they had school, it was only for a few months. And schools then were just very much in a community, in a small community would be the school. Unfortunately, my daddy could not read, but he could, he knew much about mathematics, about figures he could do, and I'll explain how I know that later. And my mother, of course, she did learn to read and to write her name, but my dad, I have documents where he made a mark and they signed his name. But the thing I want to emphasize is they were determined that we become educated. So they not only saw that we went to elementary school, high school, but even college. And the 3 daughters, my sisters who are living now, and I were all taught school. One sister taught 40 years. I was in school work 32. The other one was less. My brothers were successful in different ways. One was very skilled carpenter, and even back years ago, many years ago, he would work for the U.S. Air Force, and he would be flown to Air Force bases to help build barracks for them. And I have interesting things that he dug up from the ocean, bottles and things, and brought back. But anyway, I want to spend my time right now telling about our home life as 6 children. Not only were my parents mentally smart, they showed a lot, I think, of initiative in doing different things, because we did some of the things in the community that no one else did. My father had a sawmill, And to operate that sawmill, he also had a steam boiler or an engine, and we of course had to use the wood and the fire to build up enough steam. And with that steam, he would saw this lumber, even cut the logs and all from his own farm or his family wooded areas, and saw wood. And he even, when I was in high school, I attended one of the first buildings on what is now Appalachian University's campus. I attended a building that was called the Watauga Academy, and my father had sawed on his sawmill some lumber that went into that wooden building for the Watauga Academy. He also sawed some lumber which was used in the church, which is now standing, called Poplar Grove Church. And so that's what I mean. He knew how to figure the lineage and all of lumber. He knew how to count money and figure things financially, although he did not sit down and read books like many parents do now. Not only did he have the sawmill, we were the only family in the community. We had a tannery. Now, the tannery was a building where raw hides were made into leather. The tannery being a building with a roof, of course, and they called them vats, some sort of rectangular holes were dug down into the ground, and then they were lined with, I think it was wood, something that would help to hold water. They would put those raw hides in there and put water on them to soak the hair on the hides, to soften the hair on the hide. And then when that was softened enough, they had hand tools, which I'm fortunate enough to have one of them in this house right now, where they would take that tool. It was sharp, and it would scrape the hair off and get the animal hide smooth and all the fur or hairs off of it. Then I have mental pictures of those animal hides hanging to dry. And I did not see this happen myself, being right much younger than my oldest brothers and sisters. But at one time, a relative came and lived in our home and made some shoes from some of the leather that was tanned and made in the tannery. So he had the sawmill, he had the tannery, and then he became interested, in venturing out in growing extra farm crops. And I can remember when I was larger that we even grew crops, and he could not drive, but he bought a truck and hired a driver, and he would in the fall, he would take the produce and take it to about 30 some miles away to a mill town near Lenore, North Carolina, and he would go he and whoever was helping him, in that truck, they would take their farm products and sell them from house to house to have income for our family. So he showed a lot of initiative, I thought, in that way. Then we had animals on the farm, not only just for our own livelihood, but also to help us to have family income, because we had our own garden that we grew vegetables, which made us not have to buy any vegetables much, but we needed meat. But we grew different animals for sale and for consumption as our own food. Of course, we had the cows for milk, for beef. We had the sheep, which we used for wool, and then for mutton if we chose. And my mother became very interested in turkeys, and that was an interesting chore I had as a little girl. The turkeys liked to slip into the wooded area build their nest and lay their eggs, and we would have to watch where they would go to get to their nest, because when they had enough eggs, they would stay on that nest until they hatched their baby turkeys, and then we'd bring the mother and the babies to the house and care for them. And during the summer months, we would feed and care for the turkeys. And in the fall then, around Thanksgiving time especially, we would sell those turkeys, and that made income. Well, now, why did we need income in the fall? Well, one thing, we needed for school clothing. Another thing, we needed it to buy the necessities that we could not produce. We needed sugar, we needed coffee, we needed rice. Of course, we did not have that, and so those would help us buy those and things like cheese or stuff that we did. Although my mother did make homemade cheese, she would do that. But I can remember another thing that my dad did that was the only one in the community. He built an apple house. Now, why an apple house? You'd think you could put them in any house, but no, this apple house was to keep the apples from freezing during the winter. And you know how he insulated that house? Okay, between the walls, here was the outside wall, and here was another wall, and he put sawdust. That sawdust from the sawmill acted as an insulator for that apple house. So we could keep apples in there, we could keep potatoes in there, we could keep cabbage in there, and that was our storage for our winter food. And I thought that showed right much to build an apple house. I showed much initiative or creativity. Our source of water was a water spring. It is in existence now, and one of my nieces owns that mountain spring, and is restoring it. It is still, the water flows in it, but when we used it, we used it not to carry the water from it to the house to drink and to cook with and to bathe with. And that's where we kept our milk and our butter and the perishables, because you see, when I was young, we had no electricity, no refrigerator or storage to preserve our foods, so that our spring house served as our refrigerator. And how good that milk was! And the milk, it would be milk from our own cows, and it would be whole milk, and the cream would rise to the top, and we'd take that cream off and for different things. But I can remember one of my first jobs of earning money, I bought an ice cream maker, because you see, we could use that to cream and make our homemade ice cream. So that was our spring house. Now, for our other food, we had our chickens. They would lay the eggs. They would produce little chickens, of course, and there we had our eggs for our food. We had the chickens to kill, and that wasn't much fun to actually kill a chicken. But as a girl, I did it. And one summer, I worked in Blowing Rock. My aunt had a boarding house in Blowing Rock, where she kept people, and also had a lunchroom. It was called Green's Inn, and she served meals. She was a very popular place, and I worked. She paid me to work for part of one summer, and I had to pluck the those chickens' feathers for her to have it to fry for the lunchroom. And so, but you see, it was no chore because I grew up as a little girl plucking the chickens at home. And that gave us meat. I've mentioned the other meat we had, which would have been beef and mutton from the sheep and the chicken. So we had real tasty food, and my mother was a good cook. And then we preserved the foods in another way. We did lots of canning. We had jars, the glass jars, and we would boil them in hot water. Peaches, you see, did not grow well here. My father did have peach trees, I can remember, but the peaches did not develop very large and were not very tasty. And my mother liked to can peaches. And so we had that for our food. Other foods I'm trying to think that we had that was so good was grapes. We'd have grapes, and we'd have our very own grapes. Oh, yes, and my own sons remember picking cherries. We had cherry trees, and we would pick those cherries and use them in different ways and even can those. But guess what? We sold cherries by the gallon. We'd take them to Boone, or we'd tell people, and they'd come to our house and buy them. And I'm afraid to say the price, but it was either 10 or 25 cents a gallon that we would sell cherries for. And another thing that we picked for our own consumption and for sale was blackberries. See, there was many blackberries just growing wild on the hillsides, and we'd go and pick those and use them, and then we'd sell them, and it was income for us. And even my sons recall gathering those fruits and berries. What else about food would be interesting to recall?
What were some of your chores, and what would a typical day look like when you were growing up, and how much of it was food related? And
Mark is interested in a whole beginning of a day. Like, we did usually get up kind of early, and our breakfast.
When you say early, you're talking
early was like 5 to 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, before daylight, always before daylight, because Dad liked to go out to work soon after daylight. The first thing was to milk the cows and do the milk, bring in the milk. But
would you do some milking?
I milked myself, and one of my chores, as I was even smaller, I could go and drive the cows. You see, the cows in the summer especially would go on the mountainside to graze, and in the afternoon you would have to drive them in off the mountainside. Then you had a pen like that you could keep them in the night, just the milk cows especially. You'd keep them in the night so they would be there ready to be milked in the morning.
Okay.
But another morning chore would be to go feed the pigs.
Okay.
See, and about the sheep. Now that was interesting. We had a sheep barn, and of course the sheep's you had the ewes, the mother sheep, and during the early spring you had to keep them in the barn to have them in a warm place to give birth to the baby lambs. And it was our chores. So many chores was not pointed out as one member of the family. Different members of the family did what was necessary at that time or help. But I personally was more outdoors than my sister Ella, which was older than I. I was considered sort of a tomboy because I did the outdoor things more. And I can remember going to the sheep barn and carrying in the little lambs when they'd be real tiny, real small and very young and even damp from the birth, and we'd lay them in front of the fireplace where it was warm until they were dry and old enough, and take them back to their mother. Then, so the mother would start nursing them and feeding them. And that's about the chickens and the turkeys and the sheep and the Horses, we always had horses. We had them for different reasons. We had them to pull the farm machinery, work. And then, and this is interesting, I didn't understand so much then, on Sunday afternoon it was sociable to go horseback riding. But my father was so considerate of the animals that he didn't want us to run the horses very fast. But we'd get with our neighbors and their horses, and we would we still rode the horses some on Sunday afternoon, even if it was there. I want to
So
tell.
you respected the animals a lot.
We did.
Yes.
Now, my father, being very uneducated, was a very caring, compassionate man. He cared for animals, but he loved his children. Mother used to say that when one of us was born, that Dad would sit on the front porch. When he's sitting on the front porch, if he saw someone coming or walking by, he would run to the road and tell them to come in and see the new baby. That he loved his family so much. And I, as I say, used to go with him to hoe corn and the beans and the different things. And you can't understand hoeing, but you take a row, and my dad would always get up and dig in my row so I could keep up with him or the older adults. And that was interesting. But back to the horses, when they would have a young horse, and they would have to do what they call, they'd have to break them to work. See, they were a colt, and they didn't know how to work. And I have mental pictures of them trying to do that. They would put the saddles on them, and then they'd have to be very rough with them to make them get used to wearing harness, get used to being into the whatever was necessary for them to pull the wagon or to pull the machinery that was on. There wasn't a lot of machinery on the farm. It was plows, heavy plows, or different machinery, and they was pulled by that. Now, something else that was interested in farm work was killing the hogs. See, you grew them from baby pigs, and that was a chore. Talk about a typical day of mornings, you had to go feed the pigs. And that a lot of times was store-bought, not store-bought, but it was table scraps. It was corn or grains that you grew on the farm. Another thing that my dad was interested in was a variety of grains. I know we used to, we had a field, you called it a field or a patch, where you'd have a little garden of. He had millet, and that was some kind of a grain that was a little unusual, but we used it for feed, and it was, all farms did not have that.
Can you tell me how big your farm was? Just roughly how much was wooded, how much was field, how much was grazing land, if you don't mind?
I'd say 50 acres around my house, because when we divided it up, we got to, if 6 of us got, there'd been 50 acres or more. But then my father was interested in acquiring land, and when he could, and land would come for sale adjoining ours, he would buy it.
I see.
And he would work. That's one thing, that's one reason that he resorted or found other ways to make cash, so that he could buy land from a neighbor when a neighbor was ready to sell some land. But telling about him being so caring for others, if a neighbor was sick in the community, or if the head of a household should die, the father should die, my father would help, would gather together different neighbors, and they would go in and help that widow with her garden, or with chores around her house. But I can remember that many times that Dad was the leader. I mean, you know, he'd say, "Let's do so and so for Mrs. Williams," and they did that. The church, I can remember Dad taking us to church. Of course, and I must say this: at that time, a lot of mountaineers made bootleg whiskey, liquor, but my mother said in our family that was a no-no. And we were not, they did not manufacture White Lightning. And another thing that they did though, a man was hurt badly, and I did not witness this, but they said that they got help, and they took this man into our house, and they turned their table into like a medical table, and they got help to come and doctor him, whatever surgical thing had to be done, like sewing up. Maybe it had been a problem where he'd gotten cut badly, and they just made their dining table into a medical table and got someone to come and sew up that wound. And they these are things that I know happened because I either experienced it or was around when it did happen. And speaking of childbirth, of course we were all born at home by the birth was with and by a midwife, and in my case it was my father's sister, Aunt Celie. Her name was Celie Penley, and she delivered I think most of my family. And what else about family life, maybe family projects or life?
Can you tell me about kind of your days and even the evening meal and what y'all did for entertainment at night?
I am so glad you asked about family life meals. I said we had breakfast early, and my mother always made hot biscuits.
Wow.
And usually we had meat for breakfast. Lots of times it was pork. It would be country ham, or it would be sausage or tenderloin, along with that meat, she would make gravy. So we had gravy and biscuits, and sometimes rice and some cooked cereal. But those were before the days of boxed cereals. At least it was before the days of boxed cereal at our house, because you see we had our own cream for our own cereal, and instead of grits we used the corn for hominy. It was cured. Mother would cure beans. We used the vegetables different way, and she would pickle them, and she would put them down in a wooden jar. I beg your pardon. I should have said say a stone jar, a ceramic stone jar, and she would put beans down in there, and on top of that she would put ears of corn, and that pickled the beans and the corn, and they were very tasty. And then she made sauerkraut with cabbage, and of course we had that kraut. And then for that, I've told you some about breakfast. The farm, sometimes they would, different members of the family would go to a field. We called them the back fields, and at the back fields would be potatoes or some vegetables, and they'd go early in the morning to hoe them or to work in them. Well, after they left, Mother started preparing lunch, and some of us then, I experienced this a lot, I would take lunch to them. And that lunch would be hot vegetables, and usually a cobbler, and usually cornbread. And they would either take milk or we would take milk, because there would be some way to keep that milk cold. They'd be working near a mountain spring or something like that. And I do know, one time they used to work near a field, and below that field was a waterfall, and that was beautiful. And that has been long dried up, but that was what we called sort of the back fields. And I have mental pictures of water flowing and coming down over those rocks of that waterfall. And fortunately now that is covered in heavy wooded area, rather large trees, and fortunately that is in our family. But there was an old house there on that piece of property, but it has fallen down, and there's a big rock chimney standing even now. And see, through the middle of the property was a creek, and the head of that creek was then, when I was a teenager, was and is now a partial source of Boone, the town of Boone's water supply. And my brother, an older brother who is unfortunately deceased now, Lewis used to go and care for, we called it caring for that house, the chlorine house. He had to go and check that house where this water supply was coming from, kind of a dam, and he had to check that the right amount of chlorine was going into Boone's water supply. And before I was married, they piped that water from way up on Winkler's Creek to Boone, and we were fortunate to get a hook on to Boone's water supply. And there we were, about 2.5 to 3 miles out, but we had Boone water supply, and we got to pump it into our house and have that, and of course that replaced the real need for the spring house. But I can remember when we didn't have electricity and we used the lights at home, and we would go to church. And I wanted to tell this about church, about my father and mother being so active in church. Of course, as I say, being reared by in a Baptist minister's home, we were always taken to church. And back then, we did not have preaching every Sunday. We had preaching once a month. That was on a Sunday. On a Saturday, we would have a big church business meeting. And my father would take us, even the small children, to that business meeting. And of course, after the business meeting, there would be a devotional type. But then is when they transacted the business of the church, like electing leaders, deacons, or Sunday school teachers. And there was a practice then, if members misbehaved too much, like the misbehavior I'm thinking of now was public drunkenness, and they call it not throwing out, but they would withdraw membership. That's what they did. They withdrew the membership of a drunken person from the church.
Wow.
And before they could come back and become a member, they would have to come and tell them that they were sorry, that they were, that they were responsible for having displayed public drunkenness, and they were sorry, and they would take them back into the church as members again. And as a child, I was exposed to that. So now I'm interested in church business meetings. We call them conferences now, and we have them in our own church, public church conferences. And of course, we had Sunday schools. We had a church bell, and that was something my dad helped to build, was the church, the bell tower. And I remember ringing I did not do it myself, but they would ring the bell when it was time for Sunday school.
Okay.
And they would ring the bell.
Would you walk to church?
Yes,
Was
we
it-
walked to church. We had no car back then, a lot of times. And we had to walk, and the roads were muddy. And for girls, it was kind of embarrassing because we didn't wear pants. We wore long socks. And in the winter, we wore long johns. And you had those long johns under your socks. And it was kind of embarrassing with muddy shoes and long socks, you know. And I have been, as I grew older, I can remember my sister and me, we would take some other shoes and change just before we'd get to the church, because we'd cross a creek and we would leave our shoes near the creek and go on with better shoes on to the church building. And that church building is still standing, and the bell still rings when they choose to ring it. There was a time it did not. And they have a big fellowship hall, which is a separate building, and that's where we have our annual family Austin reunions. They have a kitchen and a wide area, and the 6 children take turns each year. A child has the responsibility of setting a date, a time, and a place for a family reunion. Last year was the Adams time, and we met at the Poplar Grove Fellowship Hall. I was trying to think of something else about church. Of course, the schoolhouse stood near the church, and it was called Poplar Grove School. I went there only through the first and second grade.
Okay.
But my older brother and sister, Louis and Ella, had gone there. But then they were ready to go to a Boone School. I started, and that made 3 of us walk into Boone School, and I dropped out of Poplar Grove. But something about the school that was unusual was that when I can remember going as a little girl to Poplar Grove School, was for 2 teachers, the buildings, and that was characteristic of the schools in this mountain area. They would be built with 2 rooms, and then a cloak room. That was where you'd hang your coat and for other storage. And the one room was for like the first 3 or 4 grades, and the other one was for the next. The grades were 1 through 7. No kindergarten and no 8th grade in elementary school. And this particular county, so far has never had middle school. We've just gone from elementary school to high schools. But I went to Poplar Grove, and then we at that time when I was a little girl, I remember we didn't have an outdoor bathroom or facilities, and there was a lot of wooded area that we used for the bathroom. That still surprises me to think of that.
I guess
Of course, I didn't.
everybody did it.
I
It was
don't
just
guess
kinda
that
normal.
lasted. I mean, I guess they soon, surely, corrected that. But the school was a sort of a social center. It had no public. It had no electricity, and neither did the church. And I can remember going for church night services when I was before my marriage and before as a teenager. We had oil lamps, and we'd go and pull them down and light the oil lamps for the we call them BYPU. It was Baptist Youth Training Union. Baptist Youth BYPU. Anyway. And something else. I was very interested in church activities, and we had revivals. And of course, revivals then, the preachers they talked very much about heaven and hell, and they talked the importance of a personal religious experience with Christ, with Jesus. And at age 9, it was not at the church. I did attend the revival, but I was at home one night, and I had this very vivid religious experience, and it is. I am very aware of that. This time in my life, that was very important to me because I felt very close to Christ as my Savior, and then I was baptized in a pond. They would pond up the water, and there was a group of us, a half dozen or 9 or something, that were baptized in this water. And then that, in the Baptist faith, that baptism precedes church membership. I had outstanding Sunday school teachers, and then worked myself as a Baptist young people's leader. But my sister was an outstanding Sunday school teacher and even superintendent of Sunday school, which was unusual for women then. Of course, she's the one that taught 40 years in the Boone Elementary School. And when I get to telling about education, I want to tell some about my childhood schooling at Boone Elementary School. You think I should tell more about my siblings and family life at home with my parents?
Sure. We've only got about another 5 minutes left on this tape, so I may just ask you real quickly what an evening was like at your house with your siblings, and then
Oh yeah, I meant
more
to.
about school.
Evening was another fun time. Mother would still cook another hot meal, mostly vegetables.
Okay.
Most of vegetables and a dessert. And I remember personally being younger than the others. See, the child in front of me was like, several years older than me, whatever he ate, 6 or 7 years older than me, and then my brother was 8 years younger, so I was in there, a baby for a while, and Dad would call me doll, and then I would, at the supper table, I remember eating supper, and then we'd sit around and talk, and a lot of times I would lie down from my stool, we had stools or chairs, and go to sleep. And then I remember sleeping at night. It was cold, and I slept between my 2 sisters. We slept in a bed, and we had 2 beds in the fireplace room, which my dad and mother's bed, and then the girls' bed, and then the boys had a bed upstairs. We had a 2-story house. And but evenings we would play games. The neighbors, I had cousins that didn't live very far away, and they would come and we'd play with balls, throw them across the house, ain't me over, or we'd play other types of balls. And Sunday afternoons were real sociable. I told about horse riding, but you didn't invite friends home from church, and you'd play ball out in the field, or ride the horses or do things like that. But evenings, you'd sit around the fire and tell stories, or tell community news. If the neighbors came in, they'd tell happenings or things about their family. Sure. And while the parents would visit with each other, and the children would play on evenings after a day's work on the farm.
Sure.
So the whole day was filled with work, and my dad was good to let us off on Saturday. We did not have to work much on Saturday afternoon. Okay. We'd have to do Saturday morning chores, but then Mother was good too. She would cook a lot of food before Sunday, but then warm things for lunch, and we could always invite somebody home from Sunday school or church. Won't you go to my house to eat? And then cousin Henry or Sam or Mary are coming, and we'll play over in the meadow this afternoon. Oh, wow. So Sundays were social days.
Sounds like it.
With growing up, during my childhood.
Sure.
So
that sounds great. What time did you usually go to bed? What time did your parents usually?
Well, my father always went to bed early.
Early?
He went to bed early, and even when I was dating, when I was an adult dating, Daddy would go to bed, and
You talking
From
about
it-
9 o'clock or?
Yeah, or 8 or just
8,
at
yeah,
dark
yeah,
because
wow.
he got up early. Of course, a lot of times my mother would get up and build a fire. See, that was something. Heating was kind of a problem.
Sure.
It really was.
Take a lot of firewood, and you just had a fireplace.
Yes, a fireplace. Well, we had a stove. We finally got a little metal stove
Okay.
that would use wood.
Okay.
And then we had the kitchen stove that would give off a lot of heat because you see it had your top to cook on top, and then it had an oven, and then it even had a warming closet. It had a kitchen range then had 3 parts.
So you would just would you build a fire,
Fire,
in, the,
yes.
in the stove? Which
In
part?
the-
In the bottom part?
No, in the center part.
The center part.
Right under the eyes, like the
Sure.
electric eyes.
Okay.
The wood would be under that, but that wood would heat the oven, which is under the
Wood was
wood,
underneath there.
and then the
Okay.
warming closet was higher, and that's where you'd do just what it said. You would keep your food warm.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that was the type of range.
Sounds great.
So
Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up this tape, if that's okay. Thank you very much.
I don't know how I've done, but
You've done wonderfully.
I saw I got
Oh,
loud.
it's wonderful.
I got excited, didn't I?
Understandably. Understandably.